I did not see the warning in the sky first. I saw it on the faces of mothers who had buried their sons. I saw it in villages where children walked over red dust with empty stomachs, while beneath that same soil lay gold, minerals, and blessings that should have fed them. I saw it in the silence of old men who remembered promises made by outsiders, promises wrapped in beautiful words, but followed by debt, pressure, and disappointment. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, a son of Burkina Faso. I was not born in a palace. I did not grow up surrounded by comfort, luxury, or the soft language of power. I grew up in a land where the sun burns hard, where dust rises with every step, and where the pain of the people is not a story written in books, but something you hear in the morning, see at noon, and carry in your heart at night. Burkina Faso is a small country in the Sahel, but the wound it carries is not small. It is the wound of Africa. For many years, I asked myself the same questions. Why does Africa have gold, yet so many of her children remain poor? Why does Africa have fertile land, yet families still struggle for bread? Why does Africa have uranium, oil, diamonds, cobalt, forests, rivers, and strong people, yet so many nations still live under the weight of debt and dependence? The more I looked, the more I understood that Africa's suffering was not an accident. It was not because God forgot Africa. It was not because our people were born weak. Africa's pain came from centuries of robbery, division, silence, and fear. In the past, foreign powers came with ships, chains, guns, flags, and maps, drawn in distant rooms. They divided land they did not create. They divided people they did not understand. They took our bodies, our labor, our minerals, and our dignity, then called it civilization. But when direct colonial rule ended, the chains did not fully disappear. Iron chains became chains of debt. Military occupation became economic control. Orders became aid conditions. Colonies became influence. And some smiles became more dangerous than weapons. I do not speak against ordinary people of the West. I speak against systems that have lived from Africa's sweat, blood, resources, and silence. Then one heavy night, when my heart was full of questions about Burkina Faso and the future of Africa, I had a dream. In that dream, Jesus came to me. He did not come to teach hatred. He did not come to command revenge. He came to open my eyes. And the words I heard were simple. Do not be afraid, but stay awake. That night, I sat alone in my office with a silence around me that felt heavier than stone. Before me lay a map of Africa. It was not just paper to me. It was not just borders, names, capitals, rivers, and deserts. It was a living wound. My eyes rested first on Burkina Faso, my country, my home, my responsibility before God and before the people. Small on the map, yes, but not small in suffering. Small in size, yes, but not small in courage. I looked at that place in the heart of the Sahel, and I thought of the mothers who had lost sons to violence. I thought of soldiers who had gone into danger with courage in their hearts and uncertainty in their eyes. I thought of villages emptied by fear. I thought of children born on land rich with minerals, yet growing up without enough food, clean water, or classrooms strong enough to protect them from rain and dust. Reports were spread across my desk. Reports about security. Reports about poverty. Reports about displaced families. Reports about resources. Reports about outside pressure. Reports about promises made by powerful people far away, people who often spoke of partnership, but whose words sometimes carried the weight of control. I looked at those reports and then looked again at the map. The question rose inside me like fire. Why is Africa so rich, yet her people are so poor? Why does the soil beneath our feet contain gold, uranium, oil, diamonds, cobalt, and fertile land, yet so many families still struggle for the simplest things? Why do others look at Africa and see opportunity, while many Africans are taught to see only crisis? Why do those who speak loudly of freedom often arrive with contracts, conditions, sanctions, pressure, and hidden expectations? I did not ask these questions as a man seeking blame for the sake of blame. I asked them as a son looking at the pain of his mother. Africa is like a mother who has given milk to many, yet has been left thirsty. Africa is like a field that has fed strangers while its own children slept hungry beside the harvest. Africa is like a tree whose fruit has been taken, whose branches have been cut, and whose roots have still refused to die. I had seen how the world spoke about Africa. They called us unstable. They called us poor. They called us troubled. They showed our wars, our hunger, our corruption, our broken roads, and our displaced people. But they rarely showed the full story. They rarely showed the hands that had helped create the chaos. They rarely spoke honestly about the mines emptied for foreign profit. They rarely spoke about rivers poisoned by greed. They rarely spoke about governments pressured from outside. They rarely spoke about leaders who tried to stand upright and were suddenly called dangerous. They rarely spoke about young nations pushed into debt before they ever had a chance to breathe freely. I sat there and asked myself a question that would not leave me. Do they want Africa to remain forever a supplier of raw materials but never the master of her own future? Do they want Africa to dig, carry, export, and obey but never refine, produce, decide, and rise? Do they want us to be grateful for crumbs from tables built with wood taken from our own forests? I do not speak of every person in the West. I know there are good people in America, Europe, and many other places who have hearts of compassion. I know there are people who pray for Africa sincerely. I know there are people who do not agree with injustice done in their names. But I also know that systems can be cruel even when individuals are kind. A machine can crush people even when some of its workers smile. And that night, I was not thinking about hatred. I was thinking about truth. I was thinking about the long road behind us and the dangerous road before us. The room was quiet, but my heart was not. I felt the burden of leadership pressing on me. Power is not a crown when you understand suffering. Power is a weight. Power is a test. Power is a mirror that asks every day whether you serve the people or serve yourself. I leaned over the map again and looked from West Africa toward Central Africa, from the Sahel toward the Congo, from the Atlantic coast toward the lands where minerals sleep beneath the earth. I thought of how borders had been drawn. I thought of how tribes had been divided. I thought of how languages had been turned into walls. I thought of how nations that should have been brothers were made suspicious of one another. I thought of how Africa had been taught to doubt itself. Then something changed. The room grew strangely cold. It was not the normal coolness of night. It was the kind of cold that enters the bones before the mind can explain it. The lamp on my desk flickered. Once, then again. The papers before me trembled, though no hand touched them. I lifted my head and looked toward the windows. They were closed. No door had opened. No wind should have been there. Yet I felt a wind pass through the room, soft but sharp, like a warning. I looked back down at the map. At first I thought my eyes were tired. Then I saw it clearly. The borders on the map began to darken. Thin lines became deep marks. Deep marks became cracks. The map of Africa began to split before me like dry earth after a long drought. The cracks started near the Sahel. They moved like wounds opening across a body. They ran through countries that had known war. They ran through regions where gold had been taken. They ran through lands where uranium had been mined. They ran through forests, rivers, ports, deserts, and fields. They moved from West Africa to Central Africa. They moved from the Congo Basin to the coasts where ships leave carrying the wealth of the continent. They moved through places where children sleep beside wealth they will never touch. My breath became heavy. I wanted to look away, but I could not. The cracks were not just lines. They were memories. They were betrayals. They were unpaid debts of history. They were the cries of ancestors buried without names. They were the footsteps of slaves forced toward ships. They were the silence of villages after soldiers had passed. They were contracts signed by men who did not love the people. They were promises made in daylight and broken in darkness. Then I heard a voice. It was not loud. It did not shake the walls. It did not sound like thunder, but it entered my spirit deeper than any sound I had ever heard. Look carefully, son of Africa. Those words were gentle, yet they carried authority. They did not flatter me. They did not comfort me cheaply. They commanded me to see. I placed my hands on the desk because my body felt weak. I looked again at the map, and the cracks widened. Inside those cracks, I saw images moving like fire beneath the surface. I saw men in suits sitting in rooms far from Africa, discussing African land as if no ancestors were buried in it. I saw hands pointing at mines, ports, pipelines, forests, railways, and military zones. I saw papers marked with seals. I saw signatures exchanged. I saw smiles without mercy. I saw the language of development used to hide the hunger of control. I saw leaders praised when they obeyed and condemned when they questioned. I saw nations told to be patient while their wealth moved away every day. I saw young Africans standing at the edge of their own future, wondering whether they had to leave home in order to live. I felt anger rise in me, but also grief. Anger alone can blind a man. Grief can make him understand what must be healed. I asked in my heart, Lord, what is this? The voice did not answer with an explanation at first. Instead, the cracks spread again, and I saw Africa as if it were a great body lying wounded before heaven. Some wounds were old, some were fresh, some were made by outsiders, some were made by our own hands. That truth was the hardest to face. It would have been easier to say that all suffering came from outside. It would have been easier to point only beyond the sea. It would have been easier to say that Africa was innocent in every wound. But truth does not serve comfort. Truth serves healing. I saw foreign greed, yes. I saw exploitation, yes. I saw manipulation, yes. But I also saw corruption inside our own houses. I saw African hands opening doors to those who came to steal. I saw African mouths speaking patriotic words while signing away the inheritance of the people. I saw men who loved power more than justice. I saw elites who sent their children abroad while poor children studied under broken roofs. I saw leaders who blamed outsiders in public, then bowed to them in private. That vision pierced me deeply, because a chain from outside cannot hold a people forever unless someone inside helps lock it. A thief cannot empty the house unless someone gives him the key. A nation cannot be sold unless someone is willing to sell it. I lowered my head. I knew then that the warning was not only for the West. It was also for Africa. It was also for me. It was for every leader who claims to love his people. It was for every soldier who carries a weapon. It was for every official who touches public money. It was for every young person tempted to believe that Africa has no future. It was for every elder who remembers history but has grown tired of speaking. It was for every believer who prays but refuses to act with justice. The voice came again. Look carefully, son of Africa. This time, I did not only look at the cracks. I looked at what was beneath them. I saw roots. Deep roots. Old roots. The roots of Africa were still alive. Though the surface was broken, the roots had not died. Though the land was wounded, the spirit of the people had not disappeared. Though many had tried to bury our memory, something sacred remained under the dust. I saw grandmothers praying. I saw farmers planting. I saw soldiers defending villages. I saw children learning under difficult conditions. I saw young people asking questions their fathers had been afraid to ask. I saw Africans refusing to be ashamed of being African. I saw faith rising in places the world called hopeless. I saw that the cracks were not only signs of destruction, they were also signs that something hidden was being revealed. When dry ground cracks, it shows what was beneath. When a false peace cracks, it shows the truth. When fear cracks, courage can rise through the opening. I understood then that the night was not given to me merely to frighten me. It was given to awaken me. A leader who sleeps while his people suffer is not a servant. A leader who sees the danger and says nothing becomes part of the danger. A leader who speaks only to please foreign powers has already forgotten the cries of his own people. I stood there in that cold room looking at the wounded map of Africa, and I felt something settle inside me. It was not pride. It was not hatred. It was not the hunger to be praised. It was a burden. It was the burden to speak truth without becoming cruel. It was the burden to resist injustice without becoming unjust. It was the burden to defend sovereignty without turning love of country into worship of power. It was the burden to remember that Africa must not replace one master with another. The map continued to tremble before me. The cracks seemed to pulse like living veins. Then the voice spoke one more time, softer than before, but clearer than anything in that room. Do not be afraid, but stay awake. Those words entered me like light. Do not be afraid, but stay awake. Not hatred, awakening. Not revenge, justice. Not blindness, truth. Not surrender, courage. At that moment I felt my strength leave me, and the room seemed to fall away. The office, the lamp, the reports, the cold air, and the cracked map began to dissolve into darkness. I felt myself being pulled into a dream deeper than ordinary sleep. But before everything disappeared, I saw one final image on the map. Africa was cracked, but not dead. Africa was wounded, but not defeated. Africa was surrounded, but not abandoned by God. And in my spirit I understood the message that would guide everything that came after. The danger was real. The destruction was real. The systems of control were real. The corruption within was real. But the calling of Africa was also real. The God who sees the tears of the poor had not forgotten us. The God who hears the cry of the oppressed had not turned his face away. And the future of Africa had not yet been fully written. That was the first part of the vision. It began with a map. It began with cracks. It began with questions I could no longer silence. But it did not end there. Because after I saw the map of Africa break open before my eyes, I was taken into a place where the land itself seemed to breathe. And there, on the red soil of Africa, I saw Jesus walking toward me. I did not know where the dream had taken me. The office was gone. The reports were gone. The cracked map was gone. I stood alone in a vast land of red dust, open sky, and heavy silence. I knew it was Africa, but it did not look like the Africa shown on maps. There were no neat borders before my eyes. There were no printed names. There were no lines drawn by foreign hands. There was only land, wounded and alive, stretching farther than my eyes could reach. The soil beneath my feet was dry and cracked. The air carried the smell of dust, smoke, and old sorrow. Above me, the sky was a deep orange, like the color of evening before a storm. I heard sounds in the distance. At first they were faint. Then they grew clearer. I heard children crying. I heard women praying. I heard men speaking in low voices, tired from carrying burdens that had lasted too long. I heard drums beating somewhere far away. The sound of the drums was not music for celebration. It was like the heartbeat of the continent itself. Slow, deep, wounded, still alive. I walked forward, though I did not know where I was going. Every step raised red dust around my feet. The dust seemed to carry memories. I felt as if I was walking through the prayers of ancestors, through the tears of mothers, through the blood of those whose names had been forgotten by history but not by God. I looked around and saw villages in the distance. Some were empty. Some were burned. Some had people gathered around small fires, waiting for morning with faces that did not trust the night. I saw children standing beside wells that had gone dry. I saw farmers looking over fields that could feed many, yet their own families were hungry. I saw young men staring toward the horizon, asking whether their future was still in their homeland or somewhere beyond the sea. The grief of it pressed against my chest. I wanted to speak, but no words came. I wanted to ask why, but the question felt too large for my mouth. Then light appeared at the edge of the horizon. It was not like the light of the sun. The sun was already hidden behind the orange sky. This light was different. It did not blind me. It did not burn my eyes. It moved gently, but nothing could resist it. As it came closer, the dust seemed to settle. The cries became softer. The drums continued, but their sound changed. They no longer sounded only like sorrow. They sounded like waiting. I stood still. In that light, I saw a man walking. He did not come with soldiers. He did not come with banners. He did not come with the noise of earthly power. He wore no crown of gold. He carried no flag. He walked barefoot on African soil. And I knew him. It was Jesus. My body trembled. I fell to my knees not because someone forced me, but because my soul recognized the one before whom every hidden thing becomes visible. He walked through the red dust as if he had always known this land. He walked past the cracks in the earth. He walked past the abandoned homes. He walked past the places where tears had fallen and been forgotten by men. But he did not walk like a stranger. He walked like one who had heard every cry. He walked like one who had counted every grave. He walked like one who had seen every injustice done in darkness. When he came near me, I could not lift my eyes for a moment. My heart was full of fear, shame, grief, and hope all at once. I said, "Lord, why have you brought me here?" My voice sounded small in that wide land. He looked at me with eyes that carried both sorrow and love. There was no hatred in his eyes. There was no desire for revenge. But there was truth. And truth is sometimes more frightening than anger. He said, "I have heard the cry of Africa." The words entered the ground beneath us. They entered the wind. They entered my heart. He said, "I have seen the blood poured upon this land. I have seen what was taken. I have seen what was hidden. I have seen what is being planned. I have seen what may come if my people do not awaken." I lifted my head slowly. The land around us seemed to grow still. Even the distant crying became quiet, as if all creation was listening. I asked, "Lord, what is coming?" Jesus did not answer quickly. He turned and pointed toward the horizon. The orange sky darkened. The wind rose. Then the land before me changed. I saw a great hall appear in the distance. It was not built like a house of the poor. It was built like a place of power. Its walls were cold. Its windows were high. Its doors were guarded by men whose faces I could not see. Inside that hall, I saw long tables made of black stone. On those tables lay maps of Africa, but no African sat around them. That was what struck me first. The land was ours, but the seats were not ours. The minerals were ours, but the decisions were not ours. The rivers were ours, but the plans were not ours. The forests were ours, but the profits were already being discussed by strangers. Around the table stood hands in expensive sleeves. Some hands held pens. Some held contracts. Some held phones. Some moved small markers across the maps as if nations were pieces in a game. They marked gold mines. They marked uranium deposits. They marked oil routes. They marked ports. They marked fertile land. They marked water. They marked military zones. They marked places of instability. They marked weakness the way a hunter marks the tracks of an animal. I heard whispers in the hall. The whispers were soft, but I could understand them. Let them remain divided. Let them keep borrowing. Let them depend on us. Let them export raw materials. Let them doubt their own leaders. Let them fear standing alone. Let them believe they cannot build without us. Each sentence felt like a chain being forged. I looked at Jesus with fear in my heart. I asked, Lord, what is this? He said, this is greed wearing the clothing of civilization. I could not speak. He continued, this is what once came with chains and guns, now returning with contracts and conditions. The vision grew sharper. I saw men speaking of development while calculating how much could be taken. I saw institutions speaking of assistance while designing dependence. I saw media voices speaking of concern while preparing stories that would shame any African leader who refused to kneel. I saw advisors smiling before cameras, then whispering behind closed doors about pressure, isolation, and control. I saw that some of the destruction coming upon Africa would not arrive like an army. It would arrive as a proposal. It would arrive as a loan. It would arrive as a partnership. It would arrive as a security agreement. It would arrive as a news report. It would arrive as a contract written in beautiful language but built on the old hunger to possess what belongs to another people. Jesus looked at me and said, do not hate people, hate injustice. Those words corrected something inside me before it could become poisoned. Because when a man sees the suffering of his people, anger rises easily. And anger can become useful when it serves justice. But anger becomes dangerous when it begins to love hatred. I understood that Jesus was not calling me to despise ordinary men and women in the West. He was not calling me to curse families who had never touched African soil. He was not calling me to build my nation on bitterness. He was showing me systems. Systems of greed. Systems of domination. Systems that speak softly while taking deeply. Systems that can use even good words as masks. I said, Lord, how can such things continue for so long? Jesus turned toward the land around us. Suddenly I saw the past and present standing together. I saw ships on the coast. I saw chains on wrists. I saw flags planted in soil. I saw mines opened by force. I saw taxes placed on the poor. I saw languages mocked. I saw names changed. I saw children taught to admire those who ruled them and to feel ashamed of those who gave birth to them. Then I saw modern buildings. I saw banks. I saw conference rooms. I saw cameras. I saw contracts. I saw military bases. I saw social media screens. I saw young Africans staring at images that told them they were nothing unless someone outside approved them. Jesus said, the clothing changes, but the spirit of greed remains the same when hearts do not repent. I felt the weight of that sentence. The clothing changes. The chains change. The language changes. The method changes. But the hunger to control can remain. I asked, Lord, is Africa helpless before this? He looked at me with firmness. No. That single word broke through the dream like thunder without noise. He said, Africa is not helpless. Africa is wounded. There is a difference. I held those words in my heart. Wounded is not dead. Wounded is not worthless. Wounded is not finished. A wounded people can heal. A wounded nation can rise. A wounded continent can remember who it is. But a wounded people must first stop pretending the wound is not there. Jesus then showed me people across Africa. I saw mothers praying before sunrise. I saw fathers working land that had never fully rewarded them. I saw young people studying under weak light. I saw pastors preaching hope in villages that the world ignored. I saw Muslims, Christians, and people of different traditions living side by side in communities where poverty was heavy but dignity had not died. I saw soldiers standing in dangerous places not because they loved war, but because they wanted their families to sleep without fear. I saw workers in mines. I saw nurses in crowded clinics. I saw teachers with little pay and great patience. I saw elders who carried stories no university had preserved. Jesus said, these are not a weak people. My eyes filled with tears. He said, the world has often measured Africa by what was broken. I measure also by what survived. I thought of Burkina Faso. I thought of the Sahel. I thought of all the places where people wake every morning and continue, not because life is easy, but because surrender would dishonor those who came before them. I said, Lord, what do you want from me? He did not answer as a politician would answer. He did not give me a slogan. He did not give me praise. He did not call me great. He said, serve. The word was simple. Serve. He said, do not confuse leadership with worship. Do not confuse authority with ownership. The people are not yours to use, they are yours to serve. Those words cut deeper than any accusation from an enemy. Because a leader can speak against foreign control and still become a prisoner of pride. A leader can condemn exploitation and still exploit his own people. A leader can carry the language of liberation and still silence the poor. A leader can shout about sovereignty while forgetting justice. Jesus knew the danger inside every human heart. He knew that power can turn even a good intention into an idol. He knew that men can begin by defending the people and end by demanding that the people defend their ego. So he warned me before he showed me more. He said, if you fight injustice with injustice, you will only change the face of oppression. I bowed my head. I knew that the road of liberation was not simple. It was not enough to say no to foreign domination. Africa also had to say no to corruption, no to tribal hatred, no to greed, no to leaders who sell the inheritance of the people, no to lies told in the name of patriotism, no to fear dressed as wisdom, no to dependence, whether old or new. The wind moved across the red land. The dust rose around us again. Jesus turned and began to walk. I followed him. We walked past fields, rivers, forests, and broken roads. Every place seemed to speak. At one place I saw a mine. Men entered the earth with tired bodies. The land was rich beneath them, but the village nearby had no proper clinic. I saw trucks carrying away what the people could not afford to benefit from. I saw children watching those trucks pass, their faces covered in dust. Jesus stopped and said, a blessing taken without justice becomes a curse to the poor. We walked farther. I saw a river. Its water was dark. Women stood beside it, unsure whether to drink from it or fear it. Upstream, I saw waste from extraction and greed. Jesus said, when profit becomes God, creation suffers first, and the poor suffer next. We walked again. I saw a school with cracked walls. Children repeated lessons from old books. On the wall was a map of the world where Africa looked small in their minds, though it was vast beneath their feet. I heard a teacher tell them they must learn to leave if they wanted to become something. Jesus said, a people taught to despise their home will build another man's house before repairing their own. Those words troubled me, because one of the greatest thefts is not only the theft of gold, it is the theft of confidence. It is the theft of memory. It is the theft of a child's belief that he or she can build something worthy on African soil. We walked again. I saw a church full of people praying. Their voices rose with sincerity. They asked God for protection. They asked God for bread. They asked God for peace. But outside the church, I saw injustice continuing. I saw officials stealing. I saw contracts signed in darkness. I saw poor people ignored. Jesus said, faith that refuses justice becomes noise. I trembled when I heard that, because faith is not meant to make us passive. Faith is not meant to teach the poor to accept suffering while the powerful continue stealing. Faith is not a song that covers corruption. Faith is light, and light exposes what darkness wants to hide. I asked, Lord, then what is true faith for Africa? He said, true faith gives courage to love truth, protect the weak, reject greed, forgive without surrendering justice, and build without fear. I carried those words like fire. True faith does not make Africa kneel before men. True faith makes Africa stand upright before God. True faith does not teach hatred. True faith teaches courage. True faith does not bless theft. True faith defends the poor. True faith does not make leaders untouchable. True faith reminds leaders that God sees everything. As we continued, the land opened before us into a wide plain. On that plain, I saw people from many African nations. They wore different clothes. They spoke different languages. They carried different histories. Some were from the Sahel. Some were from the forests. Some were from the mountains. Some were from the coasts. Some were from cities. Some were from villages. At first, they stood far apart. Between them were lines drawn in dust. The lines looked like borders, but also like wounds. Some people looked at one another with suspicion. Some remembered old conflicts. Some feared losing power. Some feared being betrayed. Then I saw shadows moving between them. The shadows whispered into their ears, do not trust your brother. Your neighbor is your enemy. Your tribe must stand alone. Your language is superior. Your religion is threatened. Your nation can survive only by bargaining alone. The shadows smiled as the people stepped farther apart. Jesus said, "Division is one of the oldest tools used against Africa." I watched the people carefully. When they stood apart, each group looked vulnerable. Each could be pressured. Each could be bought. Each could be frightened. Each could be turned against another. But when some of them began to step closer, the shadows moved backward. When they joined hands, the lines in the dust began to fade. When they remembered that suffering had visited many of them in different forms, their eyes changed. Jesus said, "Unity does not mean sameness. Unity means refusing to be destroyed separately." That sentence remained in me. Africa does not need to erase its differences. Africa needs to stop allowing those differences to become weapons in the hands of those who profit from our weakness. Our languages can be treasures. Our cultures can be treasures. Our nations can be treasures. But if we allow them to become walls of hatred, then we turn blessings into traps. I asked Jesus, "Will Africa awaken?" He looked across the plain. His face carried both hope and warning. He said, "Some will awaken, some will resist awakening because sleep is comfortable to those who benefit from darkness." I understood then that not everyone would welcome the truth. Some people profit from confusion. Some people eat from the table of dependence. Some people are praised by foreign powers because they help keep their own people weak. Some people will call awakening dangerous because they fear losing their place. Some people will call dignity extremism because they have made peace with humiliation. Jesus said, "Do not measure truth by applause." That word was for me. It was for every leader. It was for every person who tries to speak honestly in a world where lies often have better clothing. If you speak truth, some will misunderstand you. Some will twist your words. Some will say you hate when you are warning. Some will say you seek conflict when you are calling for justice. Some will say you are dangerous because you refuse to be obedient to injustice. But truth does not become false because powerful people dislike it. And falsehood does not become truth because many repeat it. I looked again at Jesus. I asked, "Lord, why show me destruction if you tell me not to fear?" He answered, "Because fear and warning are not the same." Then he explained without many words. Fear paralyzes. Warning awakens. Fear makes a people hide. Warning makes a people prepare. Fear makes a leader cruel. Warning makes a leader humble. Fear says the future is finished. Warning says the future can still be changed. I understood then why he had told me, "Do not be afraid, but stay awake." The message was not a message of panic. It was a message of responsibility. It was not given so Africa would hate the world. It was given so Africa would stop sleeping while others arranged its future. It was not given so we would blame everyone else and change nothing in ourselves. It was given so we would see both the hand outside and the weakness inside. The dream then became quiet. The plane disappeared. The hall of black tables disappeared. The rivers, mines, schools, churches, villages, and borders faded like smoke. Only Jesus remained before me. He stood on the red soil, and the light around him was calm. He said, "What you have seen is only the beginning." I felt afraid again, but not as before. This fear was not terror. It was the trembling of a man who knows that truth will require something from him. I asked, "What must I see next?" Jesus looked toward the far distance. The sky opened like a burning book. I saw flames, ships, chains, flags, and faces. I heard cries from long ago. I heard the ocean carrying sorrow. I heard the sound of land being divided by pens in rooms where African voices were absent. Jesus said, "You must see the past, because a people who forget their wound will not understand their present pain." Then the red ground beneath me began to tremble. The air filled with the voices of ancestors. And before my eyes, the past of Africa opened like a book on fire. Before my eyes, the past of Africa opened like a book on fire. The pages were not made of paper. They were made of faces, names, tears, ships, chains, prayers, and graves. I stood beside Jesus on the red soil, and the wind carried voices from centuries before my birth. Some voices cried out in languages the world had tried to erase. Some voices sang songs of home. Some voices called for mothers, fathers, children, and villages they would never see again. I saw the coast of Africa. The sea was wide and dark. At the edge of the water stood men, women, and children in chains. Their wrists were bound. Their necks were bound. Their futures were being stolen before their eyes. I saw a mother holding her child as tightly as she could. A man struck her hands away. The child screamed. The mother screamed louder. But the sea did not stop. The ship did not stop. The men who traded in human bodies did not stop. I saw people forced into the belly of ships, packed like goods instead of treated as souls made by God. I saw fear in their eyes. I saw sickness. I saw hunger. I saw the terrible silence of those who had cried until no voice remained. The ocean carried them away from their land. It carried away farmers, builders, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, singers, healers, warriors, children, and elders. It carried away people with names, stories, prayers, and dreams. But those who bought and sold them did not see names. They saw profit. They did not see families. They saw labor. They did not see God's image. They saw property. I turned to Jesus, and my heart was torn open. I asked, Lord, how could men do this to other human beings? Jesus looked at the sea with sorrow deeper than words. He said, when greed blinds the heart, a man can look at his brother and call him merchandise. Those words entered me like a blade. I watched as the ships moved away from the African coast. Behind them, villages were left broken. Mothers were left empty. Fathers were left with silence. Children were left without protection. Communities were torn apart. The pain did not end when the ships disappeared. It remained in the land. It remained in the blood. It remained in the memory of those who survived. I saw generations wounded by a theft so deep that the world still has not fully measured it. Then the vision changed. The sea faded, and the sound of chains became the sound of marching boots. I saw foreign flags raised on African soil. I saw men arrive with guns in one hand and documents in the other. They spoke of order. They spoke of civilization. They spoke of progress. But behind those words I saw forced labor, humiliation, taxes, punishment, and fear. I saw maps spread across tables in distant rooms. Africa lay before them like an object. The men around those tables did not ask the rivers where they flowed. They did not ask the tribes how they lived. They did not ask the elders where sacred lands began and ended. They did not ask the mothers what boundaries protected their children. They took pens and divided the continent. A line here, a border there, a people split in two. A kingdom weakened, a language cut off from its neighbor, a wound disguised as geography. I saw brothers made foreigners to one another by ink. I saw communities forced into new names they had not chosen. I saw people told that the land of their ancestors now belonged to an empire beyond the sea. They called it administration. But I saw domination. They called it order. But I saw the breaking of a people. They called it civilization. But I saw the whip. They called it progress. But I saw villages made poor while wealth moved outward. Then I saw mines opening across the continent. Gold, diamonds, uranium, cobalt, oil, copper. The earth was cut open. The mountains were wounded. The rivers darkened. Men descended into the ground not as masters of their own wealth, but as servants of systems that would never honor them fully. I saw African hands pulling treasure from African soil. I saw foreign companies counting the value. I saw officials signing papers. I saw trains and trucks carrying minerals away. I saw ships leaving ports heavy with wealth. And near those same mines, I saw villages without electricity. I saw clinics without medicine. I saw schools with broken walls. I saw women walking long distances for water beside land that had made strangers rich. I saw children playing in dust near places where the earth had given billions. I asked, Lord, why does wealth leave while poverty remains? Jesus answered, because blessing without justice becomes plunder. I lowered my head. The words were simple, but they explained much. Africa was not poor because God had given her nothing. Africa was made poor because too much had been taken and too little had been returned with justice. The vision moved again. I saw people forced to work on roads, plantations, and railways that were not built first for their freedom. I saw men punished for failing to produce enough for those who ruled them. I saw taxes demanded from people who had been robbed of the power to shape their own economy. I saw elders humiliated in front of children. I saw languages mocked. I saw names changed. I saw schools teaching African children that wisdom came only from outside. I saw a child look at his own dark hands with shame because someone had taught him that dignity wore another face. That sight hurt me deeply, because there is a theft greater than taking gold. There is a theft greater than taking land. It is the theft of a people's confidence. It is when the child of Africa is taught to believe that his ancestors had no wisdom, that his mother tongue has no beauty, that his history begins only when strangers arrived, and that his future depends on approval from those who once chained him. I said, Lord, they buried more than bodies. Jesus said, they buried memory, and when memory is buried, a people can be made to walk in circles. I saw that this was one of the greatest wounds. Many Africans were not only robbed of resources, they were robbed of the full story of themselves. They were taught pieces of history, but not the whole truth. They were taught about defeat, but not always resistance. They were taught about poverty, but not always the theft that helped create it. They were taught about foreign heroes, but not always African courage. They were taught to admire distant capitals, but not always to honor the villages that carried their roots. Then I saw Africans who stood up. I saw leaders, thinkers, soldiers, farmers, workers, students, and ordinary people who refused to accept humiliation as destiny. Some spoke with courage. Some organized. Some prayed. Some fought. Some wrote. Some taught. Some died. I saw men and women whose names are remembered, and many whose names were buried by history. I saw those who said Africa must stand. I saw those who believed the land should serve its own children. I saw those who wanted independence to mean more than a flag and an anthem. But I also saw what happened to many who stood too firmly. Some were isolated. Some were mocked. Some were called dangerous. Some were betrayed. Some were removed. Some were killed. Some were written about by their enemies until their own children no longer knew how to understand them. I heard a sentence rise from the vision like bitter smoke. When Africa bows, they call it stability. When Africa stands, they call it a threat. Those words made my spirit tremble. I understood why many leaders fear true independence. The cost can be heavy. The pressure can be great. The attacks can come from outside and inside. A man who says yes to injustice may be praised as reasonable. A man who says no may be painted as mad, violent, extreme, or dangerous. This is why courage must be deeper than applause. This is why a leader must know whom he serves. If he serves praise, he will surrender truth. If he serves comfort, he will abandon justice. If he serves foreign approval, he will forget the poor who placed hope in him. But if he serves God and the people, he must be ready to stand even when the room becomes cold. The vision then showed me independence days across Africa. I saw flags rising. I saw people dancing. I saw tears of joy. I saw elders lifting their hands to heaven. I saw children believing a new morning had come. The sight filled me with hope. But then I saw shadows behind the celebration. The old chains had been removed from the wrists, but new chains were being prepared for the economy. The foreign governor left, but foreign influence remained. The anthem changed, but the structure of dependence often remained. The flag changed, but the mind still served distant interests. The office changed, but the debt began to grow. The language of empire changed into the language of partnership. The command became a condition. The occupation became an agreement. The chain became a signature. I saw that freedom without economic power is fragile. I saw that political independence without control of resources can become a beautiful door that opens into another prison. I saw that a nation can have a flag and still not fully own its future. I asked Jesus, was independence false? He answered, no. Independence was a door, but a door must be walked through with courage, wisdom, unity, and justice. I understood. We must not despise the sacrifices of those who fought before us. They opened doors. They carried burdens. They gave blood. But every generation must finish its own part of the struggle. The work of freedom is not completed in one ceremony. It must be defended in laws, farms, schools, factories, courts, currencies, contracts, borders, and hearts. Then the vision became personal. I saw Burkina Faso. I saw the land of upright people. I saw its villages, its soldiers, its poor, its farmers, its youth. I saw Thomas Sankara standing like a flame in history. I saw his call for dignity, discipline, work, and independence. I saw how dangerous it is when an African leader tells his people that they do not have to kneel. I saw again that memory can frighten those who profit from forgetfulness. I stood there with tears in my eyes. I knew I was not Sankara. I knew no leader should turn himself into an idol. I knew every man has weaknesses, but I also knew that a people without memory can be led back into chains while singing songs of freedom. Jesus looked at me and said, honor the past, but do not worship men. Learn from courage, learn from mistakes, and serve the living. Those words were important. Africa does not need idols. Africa needs truth. Africa does not need leaders who demand worship. Africa needs servants who remember that power is temporary but justice is eternal. Africa does not need nostalgia alone. Africa needs action rooted in memory. The Book of Fire continued to turn its pages. I saw ancestors who had suffered under slavery. I saw families who had suffered under colonial rule. I saw workers who had suffered under extraction. I saw citizens who had suffered under corrupt leaders after independence. I saw refugees walking through dust. I saw widows waiting for sons who never returned. I saw all these sorrows connected like one long river. But then I saw something else. The river of sorrow did not end in death. Beside it flowed a river of resistance. For every chain, someone prayed for freedom. For every stolen child, someone remembered the name. For every forced border, someone kept the old story alive. For every mind that fed greed, someone asked why the village remained poor. For every lie told about Africa, someone whispered truth to the next generation. This is why Africa still breathes. Not because the suffering was small. It was not small. Not because the theft was light. It was not light. Not because the enemies of justice were weak. They were not weak. Africa still breathes because God placed in her people a strength that centuries of violence could not erase. I looked at Jesus and said, Lord, this past is too painful. He answered, you must see the past to understand why the present groans. Then I understood that forgetting is not healing. Silence is not peace. A wound covered without being clean can poison the whole body. A people who are told to forget before justice is done are being asked to bury the truth alive. But remembering must not become hatred. Remembering must become wisdom. Remembering must become courage. Remembering must become protection for the children. Remembering must become a shield against new forms of slavery. I looked again at the burning book. The flames did not destroy it. They revealed the words. I saw written across the pages a message for Africa. You were robbed, but you are not empty. You were wounded, but you are not dead. You were divided, but you can unite. You were lied to, but truth can rise again. You were made to kneel, but God did not create you to crawl before men. I felt those words enter my bones. The past did not only accuse the guilty, it also called the living. It called me. It called every leader. It called every elder. It called every parent. It called every teacher. It called every pastor and every believer. It called every young African tempted to run from his own identity. It called every citizen who thinks politics is only the work of rulers. It called all of us to remember that a continent is not rebuilt by anger alone. It is rebuilt by truth, discipline, courage, unity, work, repentance, and faith. The vision of the past began to fade. The ships moved back into the mist. The chains grew silent. The flags lowered into shadow. The mines disappeared. The burning book slowly closed. But the pain of what I had seen remained alive in me. I knew I could never again speak of Africa's present suffering as if it had no history. I knew I could never again listen to powerful nations lecture Africa without remembering what had been taken. I knew I could never again look at a contract, a loan, a military agreement, or a foreign promise without asking what spirit stood behind it. And I knew I could never again blame only outsiders while ignoring the African hands that still help bury African memory. Jesus stood beside me in silence. Then he turned my eyes toward the present. The fire of the past became the cold light of modern offices. The chains became documents. The ships became trade routes. The colonial command became financial pressure. The old propaganda became modern media. The faces changed, but the struggle continued. Jesus said, now look at what is happening today. And I saw that the West no longer needed to come with iron chains when debt, contracts, media division, and corrupted hearts could do the work more quietly. Jesus turned my eyes toward the present, and the fire of history became the cold light of modern offices. The ships disappeared, but the trade routes remained. The iron chains disappeared, but other chains took their place. The foreign flags were lowered, but foreign influence still moved through banks, contracts, screens, advisors, security agreements, and the private rooms where the poor are never invited. I saw Africa today. I saw a continent full of life, prayer, music, youth, courage, and wealth beneath the ground. But I also saw a continent surrounded by systems that knew how to smile while taking. I saw nations called independent, yet trapped by debt. I saw governments with flags, armies, and national anthems, yet unable to decide freely because someone else controlled the money, the loans, the trade routes, the ratings, the media image, or the supply chains. I saw leaders enter meetings with hope and leave with conditions. I saw officials sit across from lenders who spoke politely, but every sentence carried a hook. I saw papers placed on tables. The language was beautiful. Development, partnership, security, reform, stability, investment. But beneath those words, I saw the same old question. Who will control Africa's wealth? The answer was often hidden in small print. The answer was hidden in long years of repayment. The answer was hidden in interest. The answer was hidden in concessions. The answer was hidden in silence. The answer was hidden in the fact that the people who would suffer most from those agreements were never asked to sit at the table. I saw a poor country borrow to survive. Then I saw the same country forced to cut, sell, privatize, obey, and explain itself to people who had never walked through its villages. I saw budgets shaped by debt. I saw schools waiting. I saw hospitals waiting. I saw roads waiting. I saw farmers waiting. I saw children waiting. But debt does not wait. Debt wakes before the poor. Debt eats before the hungry. Debt speaks before the citizen. Debt can become a ruler without a face. I asked Jesus, Lord, is this also a chain? He answered, a chain is not only iron, a chain is anything that takes away the freedom to serve truth. Then I understood. A nation can lose freedom without seeing soldiers in the streets. A nation can lose freedom when every decision must please creditors before it feeds children. A nation can lose freedom when its currency, markets, mines, ports, and policies are tied to the will of others. A nation can lose freedom when fear of punishment becomes stronger than love for its own people. The vision moved across Africa. I saw countries rich in minerals, yet dependent on imported goods made from those same minerals. I saw raw materials leaving the continent. I saw finished products returning at prices the poor could not afford. I saw gold leaving as wealth and returning as debt. I saw oil leaving as power and returning as fuel prices that crushed ordinary families. I saw cobalt leaving to feed the machines of the world, while children near the mines still lacked safe schools. I saw uranium leaving to bring light elsewhere, while villages near the source still sat in darkness. The pain of it was almost too much to carry. It was like watching a man sell his blood, then borrow money to buy medicine. It was like watching a farmer give away his harvest, then beg for bread. It was like watching a mother feed strangers while her own children slept hungry. Jesus said, when a people do not control the value of what they produce, others will grow rich from their labor. I saw then that Africa's struggle was not only about owning resources, it was about owning the process. It was about mining, refining, producing, transporting, selling, teaching, researching, building, and deciding. It was about refusing to remain at the bottom of a ladder made from our own trees. It was about saying that Africa must not be only a place where wealth is found. Africa must become a place where value is created. Then the vision changed. I saw media screens everywhere. Large screens in foreign studios. Small screens in the hands of young Africans. Headlines moved quickly across them. Some spoke truth. Some showed suffering with compassion. But many showed Africa as if it were only chaos, hunger, coups, danger, corruption, and helplessness. I saw how a story can become a weapon. I saw how a nation can be weakened before any soldier arrives simply by teaching the world to fear it and teaching its own people to doubt it. I saw leaders who refused unfair agreements suddenly described as reckless. I saw governments that demanded control over resources suddenly called unstable. I saw young movements for dignity reduced to insults. I saw entire nations judged by people who knew little about their wounds. I saw cameras arrive when there was fire, but not when villages rebuilt. I saw microphones appear when Africans failed, but not when Africans endured. I saw headlines that spoke about disorder without speaking about the hands that had profited from disorder. I asked Jesus, Lord, why does the story matter so much? He said, because whoever controls the story can shape what people believe is possible. That sentence opened another wound. If Africa is always shown as helpless, then even African children may begin to believe helplessness is their inheritance. If Africa is always shown as violent, then the world will accept violence against Africa as normal. If Africa is always shown as corrupt, then exploitation can hide behind the language of correction. If Africa is always shown as needing rescue, then those who come to take can dress themselves as saviors. I saw that media can be a mirror, but it can also be a cage. A mirror helps a people see themselves clearly. A cage traps a people inside an image made by someone else. I do not say Africa has no problems. That would be a lie. We have corruption. We have violence. We have poor leadership in many places. We have division. We have fear. We have failures that must be confessed. But Africa must not allow others to use our wounds as permission to control us forever. A wound must be healed, not advertised for another man's profit. Then Jesus showed me contracts. They came like long rivers of paper. Some were for mining. Some were for land. Some were for military support. Some were for technology. Some were for energy. Some were for infrastructure. Some were for food. Some were for debt. Many carried promises of progress. I saw officials signing them with serious faces. I saw foreign representatives smiling. I saw pens moving. I saw cameras flashing. I saw hands shaking. But behind many agreements I saw shadows. I saw years of extraction. I saw villages displaced. I saw profits leaving. I saw environmental damage left behind. I saw workers underpaid. I saw governments trapped by clauses they did not fully explain to the people. I saw the future being mortgaged by signatures written in the present. Jesus said, "A contract without justice is only a polite form of theft." I looked closer. Some contracts were not forced by guns. They were accepted because of desperation. They were accepted because leaders wanted quick money. They were accepted because officials were corrupt. They were accepted because nations lacked technical knowledge. They were accepted because advisors came from the same systems that would benefit. They were accepted because fear said, "Take what is offered or you will have nothing." That fear has cost Africa much. Fear has made us sell cheaply. Fear has made us sign quickly. Fear has made us believe that asking for fairness is dangerous. Fear has made leaders choose approval over dignity. Fear has made nations accept crumbs from their own table. But Jesus had told me not to fear, not because danger was absent. Danger was everywhere. He told me not to fear because fear makes the oppressed participate in their own oppression. Then I saw division moving through the continent like a sickness. I saw political division. I saw ethnic division. I saw religious division. I saw regional division. I saw language division. I saw generational division. I saw educated people despising the uneducated. I saw city people mocking village people. I saw citizens insulting one another while those who benefited from their quarrels quietly carried away wealth. I saw how division weakens a nation faster than drought. A divided people cannot defend their resources. A divided people cannot negotiate with strength. A divided people cannot build long plans. A divided people becomes easy to frighten, easy to buy, easy to manipulate, and easy to rule from outside. I heard whispers again, like the ones from the Hall of Black Tables. If they unite, they will be strong, so keep them suspicious. If they control their resources, they will rise. So keep the value outside. If their young people become proud, they will build. So teach them shame. If their leaders refuse to kneel, isolate them. If their people begin to believe, confuse them. If their elders remember history, call the memory dangerous. These whispers move through newspapers, political parties, social media, diplomatic rooms, and even through African mouths that had been trained to repeat another man's fear. I asked Jesus, "Lord, does all this come from outside?" He looked at me with a seriousness that made me silent. No, the answer was firm. He said, "The enemy also enters through doors open from within." I could not move. He continued, "If Africa blames only outsiders but refuses to heal corruption, greed, fear, and division inside itself, then old chains will be replaced by new chains." Those words were painful because they were true. It is easy to condemn the stranger. It is harder to confront the brother who sells the house. It is easy to speak against foreign exploitation. It is harder to refuse a bribe. It is easy to shout about sovereignty. It is harder to build courts that protect the poor. It is easy to remember colonial wounds. It is harder to stop repeating injustice against our own people. Jesus was not allowing me to hide behind half of the truth. He was showing me the whole wound. Yes, foreign systems have exploited Africa. Yes, Western powers and other outside forces have often treated Africa as a field to harvest rather than a family of nations to respect. Yes, the world has taken much from us. But African corruption has also opened doors. African greed has signed papers. African pride has silenced citizens. African fear has accepted humiliation. African division has made manipulation easier. No outside power can fully enslave a people whose leaders are honest, whose citizens are awake, whose youth know their history, whose resources are protected, whose courts are just, and whose faith is alive. That is why the struggle is both external and internal. Africa must resist the hand that reaches from outside. Africa must also cleanse the hand that betrays from inside. I saw government offices. In some rooms, honest workers labored with little reward. In other rooms, men treated public money as personal property. I saw funds meant for schools disappear. I saw medicine meant for clinics stolen. I saw soldiers sent to danger while others grew rich from their sacrifice. I saw poor people told to be patient by leaders whose own children lived in comfort. I saw patriotism used as a speech while selfishness ruled the heart. Jesus said, "A leader who steals from the poor prepares the road for foreign domination." I understood. Corruption is not only a moral failure, it is a national security threat. A corrupt leader weakens the state. A corrupt official sells information. A corrupt negotiator signs away resources. A corrupt judge kills justice. A corrupt soldier endangers the people. A corrupt businessman poisons the economy. Preacher blesses what God condemns. Where corruption grows, sovereignty becomes a slogan with no foundation. Then I saw fear among citizens. Some people knew the truth but were afraid to speak. Some had grown tired. Some said nothing would ever change. Some believed every leader would betray them. Some believed Africa was cursed. Some believed their children could only succeed by leaving. This fear was heavy. It was not loud, but it was deep. Jesus said, "Despair is also a chain." I thought about that for a long time in the dream. A people can be chained by debt. A people can be chained by contracts. A people can be chained by foreign pressure. But a people can also be chained by despair. When people stop believing change is possible, they leave the future to those who are planning against them. When citizens stop caring, corruption celebrates. When young people stop dreaming, the nation grows old before its time. When elders stop speaking, memory dies. When believers stop acting, injustice becomes comfortable. I saw churches, mosques, homes, markets, classrooms, barracks, farms, and offices. Everywhere the same question seemed to rise. Will Africa wake up only to accuse others, or will Africa wake up to repair itself? That question stayed with me. True awakening must be honest. It cannot be a speech only against the West. It cannot be a flag waved over corruption. It cannot be a song that hides injustice. It cannot be a slogan used to silence citizens. True awakening must make us braver before outsiders and more honest with ourselves. It must make leaders accountable. It must make citizens responsible. It must make young people disciplined. It must make elders speak truth. It must make believers live justice. It must make nations cooperate. It must make the protection of resources a sacred duty. The vision then showed me ordinary Africans again. I saw people who were tired but not defeated. I saw women selling in markets before sunrise. I saw farmers working stubborn soil. I saw young engineers dreaming of factories. I saw teachers who refused to give up on children. I saw soldiers standing guard in dangerous areas. I saw doctors serving with too few tools. I saw mothers praying over sons who had lost hope. I saw fathers ashamed that they could not provide enough, yet still rising each day. Jesus said, the future must be built for them, not for the praise of the powerful. I knew those words were for every leader. A country is not measured by applause in foreign capitals. A country is measured by whether the poor can eat. It is measured by whether children can learn. It is measured by whether the sick can be treated. It is measured by whether farmers can live from their labor. It is measured by whether soldiers are honored not only in speeches, but in care for their families. It is measured by whether the widow is protected. It is measured by whether the youth can see a future at home. It is measured by whether justice can reach the weak. It is measured by whether resources serve the people before they enrich strangers. Then I saw the present destruction in many forms. I saw land damaged by careless extraction. I saw rivers polluted by greed. I saw economies weakened by dependence. I saw culture wounded by shame. I saw politics poisoned by division. I saw faith weakened when leaders use God's name without obeying God's justice. I saw young people trained to consume but not to create. I saw nations competing for foreign approval instead of building African strength. I saw aid used sometimes as mercy but sometimes as a leash. I saw security agreements that promised protection but created new dependence. I saw education systems that produced clerks for old structures instead of builders of new futures. I saw how destruction does not always look like fire. Sometimes destruction looks like a classroom where a child is taught to despise his home. Sometimes destruction looks like a contract signed with no public understanding. Sometimes destruction looks like a leader praised abroad while his people suffer at home. Sometimes destruction looks like a loan that builds a road but captures a generation. Sometimes destruction looks like a television screen repeating that Africa cannot govern itself. Sometimes destruction looks like a young person with talent who believes he must abandon his country to become fully human. I felt the sorrow of it deeply. I asked Jesus, Lord, how can a leader carry all this without becoming hard? He answered, stay close to the poor. I listened. He said, when leaders live far from the pain of the people, power blinds them. When they remember the poor, humility can still save them. That word struck me. Stay close to the poor, not only during campaigns, not only for cameras, not only when giving speeches. Stay close in policy. Stay close in prayer. Stay close in budget. Stay close in justice. Stay close in the way decisions are made. Stay close enough to hear when the people are hungry. Stay close enough to know when soldiers lack support. Stay close enough to see when schools are failing. Stay close enough to feel when the nation is bleeding. Then Jesus said, "Do not let the suffering of the people become an instrument for your pride." I bowed my head. A leader can use suffering to make himself appear great. He can point to enemies outside and demand that no one question him inside. He can wrap himself in the flag and forget the widow. He can speak of revolution while enjoying comfort built on the sacrifice of others. He can tell the poor to endure while he refuses correction. That is not liberation. That is betrayal wearing the clothes of liberation. I felt the warning personally. It was not only for other leaders. It was for me. It was for Ibrahim. It was for any man given authority over human lives. Jesus had shown me the systems outside, but he also placed a mirror before my heart. He made me understand that the fight for Africa must never become an excuse for arrogance. The fight for sovereignty must never become permission to silence truth. The fight against foreign domination must never become hatred toward ordinary people. The fight for dignity must never become worship of one leader. Because when a people replace one chain with another, the enemy has still won. The vision of the present began to darken. The screens flickered. The contracts folded into shadows. The offices disappeared. The whispers grew quieter. But before the scene changed, Jesus showed me one more image. I saw a door. On one side of the door stood outside forces with contracts, cameras, loans, promises, threats, and smiles. On the other side stood Africa. The door was not broken. It was not forced open. It was being opened from inside. The hands opening it were African hands. Some hands opened it because of greed. Some opened it because of fear. Some opened it because of ignorance. Some opened it because of desperation. Some opened it because they had forgotten the graves of those who suffered before them. Jesus said, "Guard the door." Those 3 words were heavy with meaning. Guard the door of the nation. Guard the door of the treasury. Guard the door of the land. Guard the door of the schools. Guard the door of the media. Guard the door of the courts. Guard the door of the army. Guard the door of the heart. Because every nation has doors. And not every visitor comes to bless. Not every offer comes from friendship. Not every criticism comes from justice. Not every partnership leads to freedom. Not every African who speaks of progress loves the people. Not every leader who says sovereignty is truly serving it. To guard the door is not to close oneself from the world. Africa cannot live by isolation. We need friendship. We need trade. We need knowledge. We need cooperation. We need peace with other nations. But friendship without respect is danger. Trade without fairness is theft. Cooperation without dignity is dependence. Security without sovereignty is another kind of occupation. Openness without wisdom is an invitation to be swallowed. Jesus looked at me and said again, "Do not be afraid, but stay awake." The present faded. The cold offices dissolved. The media screens vanished. The contracts turned to dust. The whispers sank into silence. Then the sky above Africa became dark. Darker than before. I felt that Jesus was about to show me not only what had happened and what was happening, but what could happen if Africa refused to wake up. My heart became heavy. I wanted to ask him to stop, but I knew a warning must be seen before it can be obeyed. Jesus pointed toward the horizon. There, beneath a blackened sky, I saw a future that had not yet become final. And I understood that what I was about to see was not fate. It was a warning. The sky above Africa became dark. It was not the darkness of ordinary night. It was the darkness of warning. It covered the land slowly, like a heavy cloth being placed over the face of a sleeping person. I stood beside Jesus, and my heart grew weak because I knew the next vision would not be easy to see. He had shown me the past. He had shown me the present. Now he was showing me what could come if Africa refused to awaken. I must say this clearly. What I saw was not fate. It was not a final sentence written by God. It was a warning. A warning is mercy, because it means there is still time to turn. A warning is not given to destroy hope. A warning is given so that hope will not be destroyed. Before me, I saw cities rising across the continent. At first, they looked beautiful. Tall buildings touched the sky. Glass towers reflected the sun. Roads carried expensive cars. Lights shone at night. Billboards promised progress, comfort, connection, and a new age. But when I looked closer, my heart became troubled. Behind the bright buildings, the poor had been pushed farther away. They lived on the edges of the city, where the roads broke, where the drains overflowed, where children played near waste, and where mothers still wondered how to feed the family. I saw towers with light, but villages in darkness. I saw luxury beside hunger. I saw speeches about growth, but families unable to afford bread. I saw leaders praising development while the poor were made invisible. I saw a future where Africa looked modern from the outside but remained wounded inside. Jesus said, "Progress that forgets the poor is only decoration over injustice." Those words stayed with me. A nation can build towers and still fail its people. A nation can attract investors and still abandon its farmers. A nation can open airports and still close the door of opportunity to its youth. A nation can be praised in reports while mothers bury children from preventable suffering. True development is not measured only by what rises in the capital. It is measured by what reaches the village. It is measured by whether the hungry eat. It is measured by whether the sick receive care. It is measured by whether children learn. It is measured by whether the farmer, the soldier, the teacher, the worker, and the widow can live with dignity. Then the vision moved. I saw young Africans leaving. They walked in long lines. Some carried bags. Some carried nothing but hope. Some crossed deserts. Some entered boats. Some moved through borders where danger waited. Some disappeared along the way. Some arrived in foreign lands but left pieces of their hearts behind. I saw mothers standing at doorways watching sons and daughters leave because they believed there was no future at home. I saw fathers pretending to be strong while shame and sorrow battled inside them. I saw villages growing older because the young had gone. I saw talents leaving the land that needed them most. I asked Jesus, "Lord, why are they leaving in such numbers?" He said, "When a people are made to believe their home cannot hold their future, exile becomes a dream." That sentence carried pain. Migration is not always wrong. People have moved across the earth since ancient days. There can be dignity in seeking work, safety, education, and peace. But what I saw was not free movement born from choice. I saw desperate movement born from a stolen future. I saw young people leaving not because they hated Africa, but because they had been taught to doubt that Africa could ever rise. They were not only escaping poverty, they were escaping hopelessness. And hopelessness is one of the most dangerous exports of a wounded continent. Then I saw African nations looking at one another with suspicion. One country feared another. One region competed against another. One leader distrusted another. One people mocked another. While they argued, outside powers negotiated with them separately, one by one, mine by mine, port by port, debt by debt, agreement by agreement. I saw Africa divided into small bargaining tables. At each table, a single nation sat across from forces larger, richer, and more patient. When one nation resisted, pressure came. When another nation accepted unfair terms, the others were weakened. When one leader asked for justice, another leader signed away what should have been defended together. Jesus said, "What is divided can be priced cheaply." I understood. A divided Africa can be negotiated down. A divided Africa can be threatened. A divided Africa can be flattered. A divided Africa can be isolated. A divided Africa can be made to compete for crumbs. But a united Africa becomes difficult to deceive. A united Africa can speak with weight. A united Africa can protect its markets. A united Africa can refine its resources. A united Africa can feed itself. A united Africa can tell its own story. A united Africa can say yes with dignity and no without fear. Then the vision became darker. I saw new contracts being signed. The papers looked clean. The rooms were bright. The language was full of promise. Development, green energy, security, modernization, partnership, digital transformation, food systems, infrastructure. But in the spirit, I saw something behind each signature. A chain, not iron, not visible to ordinary eyes, but a chain all the same. One chain was tied to land. One chain was tied to minerals. One chain was tied to water. One chain was tied to currency. One chain was tied to data. One chain was tied to media. One chain was tied to the minds of young people. I watched those chains stretch from African soil into distant centers of power. Some chains were held by governments, some by corporations, some by lenders, some by military interests, some by technology systems, some by cultural machines that taught African children to laugh at their own names. I felt the danger of it. The future theft of Africa would not look exactly like the past theft. It would be more polished. It would speak the language of innovation. It would speak the language of climate. It would speak the language of security. It would speak the language of humanitarian concern. It would speak the language of partnership. Some of it would be sincere. Some of it would bring real help. I do not deny that. But mixed into it would be the old hunger to control the resources, decisions, and imagination of Africa. Jesus said, "Test every spirit, even when it comes with beautiful words." I knew that was wisdom for nations. Not every offer is evil. Not every foreigner is an enemy. Not every agreement is a trap. But every agreement must be tested by justice, transparency, sovereignty, and the welfare of the poor. If it takes more than it gives, test it. If it hides its terms from the people, test it. If it weakens the nation's ability to decide for itself, test it. If it enriches leaders while leaving citizens poor, reject it. If it demands silence in exchange for money, reject it. If it makes Africa ashamed of protecting its own inheritance, reject it. Then I saw factories far away from Africa. The machines were running day and night. They used minerals that had come from African soil. They used energy drawn from global systems built partly on African sacrifice. They produced phones, cars, weapons, batteries, jewelry, machines, and goods of every kind. Then I saw those goods returning to Africa. They returned at high prices. They returned as finished products. They returned with foreign brands. They returned with advertisements that made African youth desire what had been built from the wealth beneath their own feet. I saw raw material leave cheaply and return expensively. I saw Africa as a market but not a maker. I saw Africa as a supplier but not an owner. I saw Africa as a consumer of futures designed elsewhere. Jesus said, "A people who only consume what others create will live inside another people's imagination." That sentence frightened me, because control is not only economic, it is also imaginative. If others design what we wear, what we watch, what we desire, what we study, what we believe success looks like, and what we think Africa can become, then they do not only sell to us, they shape us. They shape our dreams. They shape our shame. They shape our ambitions. They shape the future before we enter it. Then I saw schools in that possible future. Some were advanced, with screens and systems, but much of what they taught still prepared children to serve structures built elsewhere. I saw children learning facts but not wisdom. I saw students repeating lessons but not questioning power. I saw young Africans trained to seek employment but not ownership. I saw brilliant minds taught to leave, not to build. I saw history reduced to a few pages. I saw ancestors mentioned without honor. I saw the pain of slavery and colonization treated as old information, not as living memory that shaped the present. I saw young people who knew foreign celebrities but did not know the names of those who died for African dignity. I saw children who could describe cities overseas but could not describe the rivers, heroes, farmers, and spiritual strength of their own land. Jesus said, "When memory is removed, identity becomes easy to purchase." I lowered my head. A people without memory can be sold anything. They can be sold a false future. They can be sold shame as sophistication. They can be sold dependence as partnership. They can be sold imitation as progress. They can be sold silence as peace. They can be sold a new chain and call it freedom. Then the dream showed me a giant baobab tree. It stood in the center of Africa. Its trunk was wide. Its branches reached like arms toward heaven. Its roots entered the soil like ancient prayers. I knew without being told that this tree represented Africa. But the tree was suffering. Its leaves were dry. Its bark was cracked. Its shade had grown thin. Children stood beneath it, but there was little shelter for them. Elders sat near its roots, weeping because the stories they carried were no longer being heard. Young people stood around it with phones in their hands, looking outward but not downward, connected to the world but disconnected from the roots beneath their feet. Then I saw the roots. 6 great chains were wrapped around them. On the first chain was written debt. On the second chain was written fear. On the third chain was written corruption. On the fourth chain was written division. On the fifth chain was written dependence. On the sixth chain was written forgotten history. The chains tightened slowly. Each time they tightened, the tree lost more life. Debt drained its strength. Fear bent its branches. Corruption poisoned its sap. Division cut its roots from one another. Dependence weakened its trunk. Forgotten history dried its leaves. I cried out, "Lord, is this the destiny of Africa?" Jesus answered, "No, this is the warning." His voice was firm. I held on to those words because the vision was painful. This was not destiny. This was warning. The baobab could live. The roots could breathe. The leaves could return. The children could find shade again. But the chains had to be broken, not with speeches alone, not with anger alone, not with flags alone, not with prayers that refused action. They had to be broken with truth, unity, courage, repentance, discipline, justice, and work. Then I saw invisible hands reaching toward the baobab. They did not carry axes. That would have been too obvious. They carried softer weapons. Shame, propaganda, debt, entertainment without values, education without memory, politics without principle, religion without justice, technology without sovereignty, aid without respect, contracts without transparency, security without freedom. They did not try to cut the tree at once. They tried to weaken the roots slowly. They knew that if the roots died, the tree would fall by itself. Jesus said, "Guard the roots." I knew what he meant. Guard the children, guard the history, guard the land, guard the language, guard the moral conscience, guard the faith, guard the dignity of work, guard the farmers, guard the soldiers, guard the mothers, guard the elders, guard the minds of the young, guard the truth. Because a tree is not preserved only by polishing its leaves. It must be protected at the roots. Then I saw a darker possibility. I saw African leaders in the future who spoke of sovereignty but lived in luxury while their people suffered. I saw leaders who used anti-colonial language to hide their own corruption. I saw leaders who replaced one foreign master with another and called it liberation. I saw leaders who silenced citizens in the name of unity. I saw leaders who praised the poor in speeches but feared their questions in public. I saw leaders who wore the clothing of revolution while their hearts bowed to greed. Jesus looked at me, and I knew this warning was for me also. He said, "A false liberator is more dangerous because he uses the language of freedom to build another prison." I trembled. No leader should hear those words lightly. Ibrahim must hear them. Every president must hear them. Every minister must hear them. Every commander must hear them. Every activist must hear them. Every preacher must hear them. Every person who claims to speak for the people must hear them. The people do not belong to leaders. The country does not belong to leaders. Resources do not belong to leaders. Power is not ownership. Power is stewardship. And stewardship will answer before God. Then I saw people in that possible future losing faith in everything. They no longer trusted leaders. They no longer trusted institutions. They no longer trusted one another. They no longer trusted promises. Some turned to bitterness. Some turned to violence. Some turned to escape. Some turned to selfishness. Some turned to false prophets. Some turned to foreign approval. Some turned to silence. A society without trust becomes easy to break. When people lose trust, they stop building together. When they stop building together, they become dependent on whoever offers order. Even if that order comes with chains. Jesus said, "Justice is the foundation of trust." I understood that a nation cannot be held together by slogans forever. It cannot be held together by fear forever. It cannot be held together by enemies forever. It must be held together by justice. Citizens must see that the law is not only strong against the weak. They must see that public money serves the public. They must see that sacrifice is shared. They must see that leaders listen. They must see that truth is not punished. They must see that the poor are not forgotten after speeches end. Then I saw the youth again. They were many, so many that they looked like a sea. Their faces carried intelligence, energy, humor, anger, faith, and impatience. They wanted work. They wanted dignity. They wanted meaning. They wanted to believe in Africa. But many stood at a crossroads. One road led to building it home. It was difficult. It required discipline, sacrifice, patience, and unity. The other road led to surrender of the mind. It looked easier. It promised quick pleasure, imitation, escape, and borrowed identity. I saw shadows trying to pull them toward the second road. The shadows told them Africa was finished. The shadows told them their languages were backward. The shadows told them farming was shameful. The shadows told them serving their country was foolish. The shadows told them faith was weakness. The shadows told them morality was old-fashioned. The shadows told them dignity could be bought. The shadows told them the only important thing was to survive alone. Jesus said, "If the youth are captured, the future is captured." I knew then that the battle for Africa was not only in minds, borders, budgets, and treaties. It was also in music, schools, phones, churches, mosques, families, farms, and dreams. It was in what children are taught to admire. It was in what they are taught to mock. It was in what they believe is possible. It was in whether they see themselves as heirs of a wounded but powerful story, or as abandoned children waiting to be adopted by another civilization. Then I asked Jesus, Lord, what will happen if Africa does not wake up? He showed me the baobab again. The chains tightened. The leaves fell. The shade disappeared. The children scattered. The elders became silent. The roots began to dry. Then the ground trembled. But before the tree fell, Jesus raised his hand. Everything stopped. The falling leaves hung in the air. The children froze mid-step. The chains stopped tightening. The wind became silent. Jesus turned to me and said, "This is why I warn before judgment." I breathed deeply. I understood that mercy had interrupted the fall. The future was still open. The tree had not fallen. The children had not all scattered. The elders had not all gone silent. The roots had not fully died. There was still time. There was still a choice. There was still a calling. I fell to my knees and said, "Lord, what must Africa do?" My question came from the deepest part of me. It was no longer political. It was spiritual. It was no longer only about Burkina Faso. It was about the soul of a continent. It was about whether Africa would continue to live as a wounded supplier for others, or rise as a family of nations under God, with dignity, justice, memory, and courage. Jesus looked at me with compassion. Then the darkness began to break. A line of light appeared across the horizon. It was small at first. Then it grew. The baobab still stood. The chains were still there, but now I could see them clearly. And once a chain is seen clearly, it can be challenged. Jesus said, "Africa must awaken before others finish writing its future." Those words became like a bell inside my spirit. Africa must awaken, not tomorrow only, not in speeches only, not in anger only, not through one leader only. Africa must awaken in its homes, schools, farms, armies, churches, mosques, courts, markets, parliaments, ministries, and hearts. It must awaken in how it uses money. It must awaken in how it teaches history. It must awaken in how it chooses leaders. It must awaken in how it protects resources. It must awaken in how it treats the poor. It must awaken in how it deals with the world. It must awaken in how it prays and how it acts after prayer. The vision of the dark future began to fade, but one final image remained. I saw a child standing beneath the baobab. The child looked up at the dry branches and then down at the chained roots. In the child's hand was a small tool. It was not a weapon. It was not gold. It was not a foreign document. It was a key. I asked Jesus, "What is that key?" He said, "Truth." Then he added, "But truth must be carried with courage, or it will remain unused." The child looked toward me, and I understood that every generation receives a key. The elders received one. The freedom fighters received one. Our parents received one. Now we have received one. And if we refuse to use it, the next generation will inherit chains we were too afraid to confront. The dream shifted again. The darkness lifted more. The baobab remained in the distance. The child with the key faded into light. Jesus turned to me. His eyes were full of command and mercy. He had shown me the past so I would understand the wound. He had shown me the present so I would recognize the chains. He had shown me the possible future so I would not sleep through the warning. Now he was about to show me what must be done. And in that moment I understood that seeing the danger was not enough. A man who sees fire and does nothing becomes guilty before those who burn. A leader who sees chains and says nothing becomes a servant of the chains. A continent that sees its roots being strangled and does nothing has chosen the silence of death. Jesus stepped closer and said, "Now listen." The light around him grew stronger. The red soil beneath us seemed to breathe again. The baobab stood waiting. The children stood waiting. The ancestors seemed to stand behind us in silence. And I knew that the next words would not only be for me, they would be for Burkina Faso. They would be for Africa. They would be for every person in the world who still believes that justice is stronger than greed. Jesus said, "Africa must stand up, and you must not betray your mission." Jesus said, "Africa must stand up, and you must not betray your mission." Those words did not come to me like a slogan. They came like a command placed upon my soul. I stood before him on the red soil of Africa, with the vision of the baobab still burning in my heart. I had seen the roots wrapped in chains. I had seen the children waiting for shade. I had seen the elders weeping over memory. I had seen the future that could come if we slept too long. Now the darkness was breaking. A soft light spread across the land. It touched the dry branches of the baobab. It touched the cracked soil. It touched the faces of the poor. It touched the villages that the world had forgotten. It touched the soldiers standing in danger. It touched the mothers praying in silence. It touched the youth praying in silence. It touched the young people who still wondered whether Africa had a future. And as the light grew, I saw another Africa. Not a perfect Africa. Not an Africa without struggle. Not an Africa built on pride, hatred, or revenge. I saw an Africa standing upright. I saw African nations sitting together, no longer as beggars at another man's table, but as brothers and sisters deciding the future of their own house. I saw leaders who understood that sovereignty was not a speech. It was responsibility. I saw ministers opening contracts before the people, not hiding them in darkness. I saw farmers honored as guardians of life, not treated as poor leftovers from the past. I saw factories built near the places where raw materials were found. I saw gold used to strengthen schools, hospitals, roads, and honest industry. I saw uranium, oil, cobalt, water, forests, and fertile land protected as the inheritance of the people. I saw young Africans learning science, engineering, farming, medicine, law, history, and faith with one purpose in their hearts: to build, not merely to escape; to serve, not merely to imitate; to create, not merely to consume; to remember, not merely to repeat what others taught them. I saw African children walking into classrooms where they were taught the truth about their continent. They were taught about suffering, yes, but they were also taught about courage. They were taught about slavery, but also resistance. They were taught about colonization, but also dignity. They were taught about betrayal, but also sacrifice. They were taught that Africa's story did not begin with chains and it must not end with debt. They were taught that God did not create them to crawl through life ashamed of their own reflection. I saw hospitals where mothers no longer feared childbirth because poverty had stolen medicine. I saw roads connecting villages to markets. I saw clean water reaching places where women had once walked long distances under the sun. I saw soldiers returning from service and being honored not only with words but with care for their families. I saw widows protected. I saw orphans remembered. I saw prisoners treated with justice. I saw courts that did not tremble before the powerful. I saw public money treated like a sacred trust. I saw churches and mosques calling people not only to prayer but to righteousness, honesty, mercy, discipline, and service. Then Jesus spoke again. He said, "Do not build Africa on hatred, build it on truth." I understood. Hatred can gather a crowd quickly, but it cannot build a nation. Hatred can shout, but it cannot heal. Hatred can destroy an enemy, but it often destroys the heart of the one who carries it. Africa has suffered too much to build its future on poison. We must name injustice clearly. We must expose systems of exploitation. We must reject agreements that keep our people poor. We must refuse to bow before any power that treats us like children. But we must not allow our righteous anger to become blind hatred against ordinary people. There are people in the West who love justice. There are people in America, Europe, and many other places who have prayed for Africa, worked with humility, and stood against the sins of their own systems. There are people outside Africa who are not our enemies. But any system that seeks to own our land, our labor, our minerals, our politics, our story, or our future must be resisted with courage. Jesus said, "Do not hate people, stand against what destroys people." That sentence became a guard over my heart, because a leader who allows hatred to rule him will eventually harm the very people he claims to defend. A nation that builds its identity only against others will never fully discover what God placed within itself. Africa must not rise only by saying who harmed her. Africa must rise by becoming what God intended her to be: strong, just, united, wise, faithful, creative, courageous, honest. Then Jesus showed me the first instruction for Africa. He did not give it as a list written on stone. He showed it through a living vision. I saw African nations standing apart at first. Each one held a small lamp. Some lamps were weak. Some were bright. Some were almost dying because of war, poverty, corruption, and fear. Then the nations began to move toward one another. Their lamps came together. The light became stronger. The darkness moved backward. Jesus said, "Africa must unite." Unity does not mean every nation loses its name. Unity does not mean every people must speak one language or forget its culture. Unity does not mean pretending there are no wounds between us. Unity means we refuse to be destroyed separately. It means we understand that no African nation standing alone can carry the full weight of global pressure forever. When we are divided, others bargain with us one by one. When we are divided, our minerals are priced by others. When we are divided, our markets are controlled by others. When we are divided, our youth are scattered. When we are divided, our enemies study our quarrels and wait for the right moment. But when Africa stands together, the world must listen differently. A single finger can be bent. A closed fist is harder to break. This unity must not be only speeches at conferences. It must become roads, trade, shared defense, student exchanges, industrial cooperation, food security, honest diplomacy, and common protection of resources. It must become African nations refusing to help outsiders punish another African nation simply because that nation asked for dignity. It must become leaders speaking truth to each other, not flattering each other while the people suffer. It must become a unity of responsibility, not a club of powerful men protecting one another from accountability. Then Jesus showed me the second instruction. The land opened, and I saw minerals beneath the soil glowing like buried fire. Gold, uranium, cobalt, oil, diamonds, iron, copper, water. Fertilent. Forests. The wealth was not dead. It was waiting. Jesus said, Africa must protect what I placed in the earth for her children. I knew this did not mean greed. It did not mean worshiping resources. It meant stewardship. God did not place blessings in African soil so that villages beside mines would remain in darkness. God did not place rivers through our land so that children would drink disease. God did not place fertile fields before us so that we would depend forever on food controlled by others. God did not place minerals beneath our feet so that we would export them cheaply and buy them back as expensive products. To protect resources means contracts must be fair. It means the people must know what is signed in their name. It means leaders must not sell the future to fill private pockets. It means extraction must not poison the land. It means workers must be treated with dignity. It means value must be created in Africa. It means the first question must always be simple. How will this serve the people? If gold leaves and schools remain broken, we have failed. If uranium leaves and villages remain in darkness, we have failed. If oil leaves and families cannot afford fuel, we have failed. If fertile land is taken and farmers become servants on their own soil, we have failed. If leaders grow rich while the people remain poor, we have betrayed the blessing. Then Jesus showed me the third instruction. I saw raw materials leaving Africa in endless lines. Then I saw them return as finished goods, expensive and unreachable for many. The vision stopped, and the line broke. In its place, I saw workshops, factories, farms, laboratories, and training centers rising across African land. I saw young people learning to build machines, process minerals, preserve food, manufacture medicine, produce energy, and design technology. Jesus said, Africa must break dependence by creating value. This word was clear. We cannot remain only exporters of raw wealth. We cannot continue to celebrate small gains while the largest value is created somewhere else. We cannot build lasting dignity if we produce what others control and consume what others design. Africa must farm with wisdom. Africa must manufacture. Africa must refine. Africa must research. Africa must trade within itself. Africa must use its youth not as cheap labor for the world, but as builders of a new future at home. This does not mean rejecting the world. It means meeting the world standing upright. Let us trade, but not as servants. Let us cooperate, but not as captives. Let us learn from others, but not despise ourselves. Let us welcome friendship, but not surrender ownership of our future. Then Jesus showed me the fourth instruction. The light turned toward government offices, courts, ministries, companies, and private rooms. At first, some rooms looked respectable, but when the light entered, hidden things appeared. Bribes, stolen funds, false reports, secret accounts, contracts written for personal gain, public money treated as private inheritance, leaders saying patriotic words while selling the people in darkness. Jesus said, Africa must heal corruption within. The words were not soft. They were necessary. No continent can be free while thieves guard the treasury. No nation can be sovereign while officials sell secrets, contracts, land, and justice. No people can defeat exploitation outside while corruption inside keeps opening the door. Corruption is not a small weakness. It is a spiritual disease. It is a thief in the house. It steals medicine from the sick. It steals books from children. It steals food from the hungry. It steals dignity from soldiers. It steals trust from citizens. It steals the future before the future is born. A corrupt leader is not merely immoral. He becomes a gate through which domination enters. He can shout against foreign control in public and invite it in private. He can wave the flag while selling the soil beneath it. He can speak of the people while stealing from their children. Jesus looked at me, and I knew this warning was for my own heart. I could not speak of corruption as if it belonged only to others. Every leader must fear the moment when he begins to justify what he once condemned. Every leader must fear the day when praise becomes more important than truth. Every leader must fear the comfort that separates him from the poor. Every leader must fear advisors who tell him only what he wants to hear. Every leader must fear becoming an idol in his own mind. Then Jesus showed me the fifth instruction. I saw classrooms across Africa. Some were poor, some were crowded, some had broken windows, but inside them were treasures more valuable than gold. Children, their eyes were open, their minds were waiting. On the walls I saw history being written, not history used to produce hatred, history used to restore truth. Jesus said, "Teach the young what was hidden." A child who does not know his history can be led anywhere. A child who is taught only shame may spend his life begging for approval. A child who never hears of African courage may believe courage is foreign. A child who never learns how resources were taken may think poverty is natural. A child who never learns how people resisted may think surrender is wisdom. We must teach our children the pain, but also the strength. We must tell them about the ships and the chains. We must tell them about the mines and the contracts. We must tell them about the borders drawn without us. We must tell them about the leaders who stood and the price many paid. We must tell them also about our failures. We must not hide African corruption behind foreign crimes. We must not pretend every wound came from outside. Truth must be whole, or healing will be weak. Our children must know that they are not born to be victims. They are heirs of a wounded but living story. They must know that their hands can build, their minds can discover, their faith can strengthen, their discipline can change nations. Their love for Africa can be clean, brave, and generous. Then Jesus showed me the sixth instruction. I saw people praying across the continent, Christians in churches, Muslims in mosques, families in homes, elders under trees, soldiers before battle, mothers before sleep. The prayers rose like smoke toward heaven. But then I saw that some people prayed and did nothing. Some prayed while stealing. Some prayed while hating. Some prayed while lying. Some prayed while oppressing the weak. Some prayed while refusing to forgive. Some prayed while accepting injustice as normal. Jesus said, "Keep faith, but do not live in fear." Then he added, "Faith without justice is not obedience." I understood. Faith must not become an escape from responsibility. Faith must not teach the poor to accept abuse while the powerful grow comfortable. Faith must not be used by leaders to silence questions. Faith must not become decoration for corruption. True faith makes a person humble before God and brave before injustice. True faith does not create cowards. True faith creates servants of truth. True faith does not call evil good because the evil man is powerful. True faith does not bless stolen wealth. True faith does not ask people to kneel before men as if men were God. True faith teaches us to forgive, but it does not tell us to protect systems that continue harming the innocent. Then Jesus turned fully toward me. The land grew quiet. The baobab, the children, the elders, the soldiers, the poor, the leaders, and the nations seemed to fade into the background. It was as if the whole vision had narrowed to one question. Would I serve or would I betray? Jesus said, "Ibrahim, I did not choose you so that people would worship you." Those words struck me deeply. He said, "I chose you to serve." I lowered my head. He continued, "If power blinds you, disaster will come. If patriotism becomes hatred, disaster will come. If you silence the true cries of the people, disaster will come. If you remove one dependence only to kneel before another, disaster will come." I could hardly breathe. He was not speaking to the image of a leader. He was speaking to the man inside the image, the man who can be tempted, the man who can grow proud, the man who can become tired, the man who can mistake applause for approval from God, the man who can begin to believe that the mission belongs to him instead of remembering that he belongs to the mission. Jesus said, "Remember this." Then he placed before me 6 warnings for my own soul. He showed me the danger of power. I saw a man begin as a servant and slowly become a master. I saw him stop listening. I saw him love praise. I saw him punish correction. I saw him confuse himself with the nation. Jesus said, "Do not let power blind you." I understood that power is useful only when it serves. When power begins to feed on the people, it becomes a beast. Then he showed me the danger of hatred. I saw righteous anger turning dark. I saw a leader speak truth about injustice, but slowly begin to despise entire peoples. I saw bitterness enter his decisions. I saw the flag become a weapon against mercy. Jesus said, "Do not turn love of country into hatred." I understood that patriotism must protect the heart, not poison it. Then he showed me the danger of silencing the people. I saw citizens afraid to speak. I saw honest criticism treated like betrayal. I saw poor people praised in speeches but ignored when they cried. I saw a leader surrounded by voices that only agreed with him. Jesus said, "Do not suppress the true voice of the people." I understood that if I claimed to defend Africa, I must listen to Africans. A leader who fears truth from his people has already begun to fear justice. Then he showed me the danger of exchanging chains. I saw one foreign influence pushed away. People celebrated. Flex wave. Speeches were made. But soon another influence entered through another door. The language changed, but dependence remained. Jesus said, "Do not replace old dependence with new dependence." I understood that freedom is not choosing a different master. Freedom is standing before all powers with dignity, wisdom, and balance. Then he showed me the center of leadership. I saw the poor. I saw children. I saw farmers. I saw soldiers. I saw widows. I saw workers. I saw displaced families. I saw the forgotten. Jesus said, "Put them at the center of every decision." A nation is not measured by the comfort of its leaders. It is measured by the life of its people. It is measured by bread, safety, justice, schools, clinics, clean water, honest work, and dignity. Then he showed me the final warning. I saw a man praying without acting. Then I saw a man acting without justice. Both paths led to harm. Jesus said, "Pray, stay awake, and act with justice." I understood that prayer without action can become an excuse. Action without justice can become oppression. But prayer joined with courage, truth, discipline, and justice can rebuild what greed has broken. After these words, the vision began to fade. The light softened. The baobab stood tall in the distance. The chains around its roots were still visible, but they no longer looked impossible to break. The children beneath it were no longer silent. The elders were speaking again. The young people were looking toward the roots. The leaders of Africa stood at a crossroads. One road led back to fear, corruption, division, dependence, and forgotten history. The other road led to truth, unity, protection of resources, economic courage, moral cleansing, and faith without fear. I knew the road would not be easy. No true road of liberation is easy. There would be pressure. There would be lies. There would be mistakes. There would be enemies outside and temptations inside. There would be days when the people would be tired. There would be days when leaders would be tempted to take shortcuts. There would be days when the world would misunderstand. But I also knew that Africa was not abandoned. The God who heard the cry of slaves still hears the cry of the poor. The God who saw blood on African soil still sees the tears of mothers today. The God who judged Pharaoh is not blind to modern systems that crush the weak. The God who calls leaders to serve will also judge leaders who betray the people. Then Jesus spoke one final time in that vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, but stay awake." When he said those words, the red soil, the baobab, the children, the elders, and the light all began to disappear. I felt myself falling backward through silence. The dream released me. I opened my eyes. Morning had come. For a moment I did not move. The room was quiet again. The lamp was still. The reports remained on my desk. The map of Africa lay before me. There were no cracks on the paper, no visible wounds, no glowing roots, no chains around the baobab. But inside my heart, the vision remained. I looked at Burkina Faso on the map. Then I looked at the whole continent. I knew that what I had seen was not given to make me proud. It was not given so I would call myself chosen above others. It was not given so I would demand worship from my people. It was given to awaken responsibility. It was given to remind me that leadership is a burden before it is an honor. It was given to remind me that Africa's enemy is not only outside, it is also fear inside. It is corruption inside. It is division inside. It is forgotten history inside. It is despair inside. And it was given to remind me that the people of the West are not my enemy as human beings. The enemy is any system anywhere that feeds on the poor, steals from the weak, hides truth, divides nations, worships profit, and calls domination by the name of partnership. I placed my hand on the map. I whispered to myself that Africa is not dead. Africa is waking. The destruction I saw was terrible, but the mercy of God showed it before it became final. The chains were real, but so was the key. The danger was real, but so was the calling. The wound was real, but so was the possibility of healing. And from that morning I understood that every decision, every speech, every agreement, every struggle, and every prayer must be measured by one question. Does this help Africa stand before God and the world with truth, justice, dignity, and courage? That is the message I carry. That is the warning I cannot forget. That is the mission I must not betray. And if you have listened this far, then perhaps this warning is not only mine, perhaps it is also being placed before you. Perhaps you too must ask what door you are guarding, what truth you are carrying, what child you are teaching, what injustice you are tolerating, and what future you are helping to write. Because Africa will not be awakened by one man alone. No president can do it alone. No soldier can do it alone. No preacher can do it alone. No farmer can do it alone. No young person can do it alone. But when a people remember God, remember truth, remember their history, reject corruption, protect their inheritance, and refuse to live in fear, even the deepest roots can breathe again. This was the core of what Jesus showed me. Do not fear the darkness, but do not sleep inside it. Do not hate people, but do not bow to injustice. Do not worship leaders, but demand that leaders serve. Do not curse the past, but learn from it. Do not surrender the future, because the future has not yet been fully written. Africa must wake up before others finish writing its story. Africa must stand up before the roots are strangled. Africa must return to God, truth, courage, justice, and memory. And I, Ibrahim Traoré, must never forget that power is temporary, but the cry of the people reaches heaven. When I woke from that vision, I knew that the warning was not meant to end in fear. It was meant to end in responsibility. I do not wish destruction upon the West. I do not wish sorrow upon any nation. I do not wish hunger, war, collapse, or judgment upon ordinary people anywhere in the world. I pray for America. I pray for Europe. I pray for Africa. I pray for the nations that have wounded others, and I pray for the nations that have been wounded. Because if mankind does not return to truth, greed will destroy both the thief and the victim. A system built on exploitation may look strong for a season, but it carries death inside itself. A nation that grows rich from another people's pain will one day have to answer before God. And a leader who uses the suffering of his people to feed his own pride will also have to answer. This is why I say again that the enemy is not a skin color, not a language, not a passport, and not an ordinary family living far away. The enemy is evil. The enemy is greed. The enemy is corruption. The enemy is pride. The enemy is any system that steals from the poor, divides brothers, hides truth, and calls injustice by beautiful names. Africa must not answer evil with evil. Africa must not answer humiliation with blind hatred. Africa must rise with clean hands, clear memory, strong faith, and a heart that refuses both slavery and revenge. I want good things for the world. I want children in Africa to eat, learn, pray, laugh, and grow without fear. I want mothers to stop burying sons because of wars created by greed and division. I want farmers to own the fruit of their labor. I want soldiers to defend life, not serve the ambitions of selfish men. I want leaders to remember that they are dust before God and servants before the people. I want the West to repent where it must repent. I want Africa to repent where it must repent. I want every nation to leave the road of arrogance and return to the road of justice. If you are listening to me now, do not leave this story as only a story. Look at your own heart. Ask what you have tolerated. Ask what truth you have avoided. Ask what door you have left unguarded. Ask whether you have chosen comfort over courage. And if these words have touched something in you, speak with wisdom, share with humility, and let others add their voices. A people begins to awaken when silence is no longer stronger than truth. So leave your thoughts where others can see them. Stay close to messages that call the heart back to God, justice, and courage. Do not follow noise. Follow truth. Do not follow hatred. Follow what leads the soul toward righteousness. May God have mercy on Burkina Faso. May God have mercy on Africa. May God have mercy on the world. May every person who walks in darkness turn back before the night becomes too deep. May every leader who has betrayed the poor repent before judgment finds him. May every young African remember that he was not born to crawl. May every old wound become a place where truth begins to heal. And may the name of Jesus be honored not only by words but by justice, mercy, courage, and love. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I speak these words as truth before God. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I speak these words as truth before God. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I speak these words as